everybody. I am sitting here today with Zemaemidjehuty Setepentoth. I don't know that I'm going to be able to say that again, so I think I got it right. He's the author of a new book called The Book of Flesh and Feather, and he is a devotee of Tahuti, the ancient Egyptian god of wisdom, magic, and several other things, which I'm sure we'll learn about in this conversation. The Greeks identified Jehuty with Hermes, of course, so I feel a kindred spirit with him already, since my my work has been called the New Hermetics for many years. So so welcome to the show, Zemi, Reverend Zemi.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. I'm looking forward to talking with you. So to begin with, the Book of Flesh and Feather, this is a book about a devotional approach to worshiping the god Jehuty.
Yeah, more or less, it is the establishment of a cosmology in which one can worship Jehuty in the modern world.
Now, you've pronounced it a number of different ways to me in our pre-talk. You pronounced it Jehuty, Tahuti, and Thoth. Is Jehuty your preferred way of approaching the name?
Jehuty sounds better coming out of the mouth.
Sure.
In conversation. Tahuti kind of has a better rhythm to it, and then Thoth is just the name everybody knows.
Sure. Although I think Tahuti is a pretty well-known one in occult circles, but yeah. Jehuty is a little bit more obscure. Which one do you think is the most correct of them?
Oh, well, Tahuti.
Tahuti.
The Greek Thoth is actually a bastardization of that specific name.
Right.
So it would have been Tahuti, and they just kind of combined it all into Thoth. So.
How did they? I mean, obviously it would be more like Tut or something like that would be the way that they would have said it. But how did they get from Jehuty?
Well, there would have been a number of different ways to refer to him. I mean, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of epithets assigned to every god, but
sure.
That specific one came from reading Tahuti, and then basically the Greeks just trying to spell it phonetically as closely as they could.
Mm. So do you think they would? Do you think they would have pronounced it like Tehot? You know, like would there?
Well,
would they have?
They probably would have certainly tried, but as time went on, they just kind of got closer and closer to Thoth.
Right. I mean, well, Thoth is obviously the American way that we say it. Even a British person would say it slightly differently than that. So I mean, over time, things obviously shift. So let's begin at the beginning. How did you become interested in a magical world in general, but Jehuty in specific?
Well, I guess for most of my life, I had kind of been dancing around the subject one way or the other. Whether it be something that I was reading, way into the Robert Anton Wilson books, or at a young age, I was very interested in Egyptology as well. But I could never wrap my head around religion. Yet I grew up surrounded by people that demanded I be religious, but had no way of teaching me how to be religious. So it was something I abandoned for a long time. And then when I kind of started having experiences with the paranormal, my mind kind of started opening up to that stuff just a little bit. And then one day in rural Missouri, I had kind of a dramatic experience wherein a glossy ibis descended and landed on a dock in front of me, clutching a snake. And it was just kind of in that moment that I realized I had been trying to wrap my head around devotion to Hecate. But it was in that moment I realized that it was Thoth that I should be devoting myself to. So I did. And yeah, everything has worked out well since then. I've got one book published, one I'm about to publish, one that I will be publishing next year. I've got one class already happening. I've got one in the works. I've got a deck of oracle cards. It's just basically whatever I want to do. I now have a way of doing it. So that's kind of validation. So long as I'm devoted to Thoth, things happen. So
Well, let's talk about those things for a moment, and then we'll step back to your chronology a little bit more. But so the Book of Flesh and Feather has just been released very recently, and your next book, which is called Litanies of Thoth, is coming out in it's either by the time this airs, it will be out, or at least a pre-order is available. So what is the difference between those two? What is the purpose of each of those books?
well, like I said, the Book of Flesh and Feather is written to establish a cosmology in which a person can develop their own religious devotional practice. It doesn't necessarily have to be to an Egyptian god, but the book is all Egyptian gods. But then the Litanies of Thoth is 365 prayers, as well as 2 calendars. A number of holidays are highlighted. What else? There are several illustrations in it as well. And then a number of divination techniques are included in the book as well. So it's kind of a little bit more like, once you have established your religious practice, the Litanies of Thoth is a little bit more supplemental, I guess.
So there are a lot of practices and things to do with the Book of Flesh and Feather as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that being said, though, the 2 books are worlds apart. The Book of Flesh and Feather is sort of more of a book with which you work. The entirety of the book is basically a devotional act, a ritual of sorts. At the end, you sort of initiate yourself into, devotion to whatever god you choose. I call the god Thoth or Jehuty, but it could be whatever god you want. I feel like everybody's familiar with the Greek magical papyri. If you think about any of the spells in the Greek magical papyri and how many names they call out in every spell, there's not really any spell that's dedicated to calling on just one god.
Yes.
They almost sort of see God as being this huge nebulous force, and then the names you throw out to that force sort of hone in on certain areas of that force's power. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So to that extent, the Tahuti that's in the Shrine of Flesh and Feather is sort of represents the eyes of all gods. When you're looking at the effigy in my shrine, you can see your god in it as well. I lost my train of thought. So what was the question?
You were saying that the essence of the book, I think, can bring you towards various different god forms, but that Tehuti for you is the essence of that.
Yeah, and then the Litanies of Thoth is, like I said, it's just devotional. It is a prayer. I have found that people are, one, sort of nervous devoting themselves to a god. They're nervous establishing a devotional practice, and maybe if they have, they don't exactly know what to do. So I kind of thought I'd help people with that. So I wrote all of these prayers over the course of like 3 days, with the specific intention that, with the knowledge in mind that prayer isn't really anything at all unless you are accountable for what you're praying for and you take action after praying. Prayer is not some sort of a magical act. It's sort of a way to maintain your connection to your higher power. So I wrote a little essay in there about that as well.
So with both books, if you are a devotee of Hecate, or if you're a devotee of Osiris, or you're a devotee of Ra, that the work in the book can apply to that as equally as it applies to Tehuti?
Yeah, absolutely. People have this idea that the ancient world was separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, when in reality it was just a whole bunch of people sort of just smashed into these big cities, sharing ideas, helping establish things with each other. So I don't see any reason why that can't still apply to religious devotion today. So like I said, I'll call Jehuty the all colors Father, but if that epithet applies to your patron deity, apply that epithet to your deity. The one who comes on waves of sound. Again, if that's Hecate to you or Demuzid, by all means, apply that epithet to that god.
So let's take a step back, and we'll come back into this territory again, I'm sure, because I've got a lot of questions. But let's take a step back to the beginning of your awakening. You said you were always interested in the subject of Egyptology, and you were somewhat interested in all of this stuff. You obviously read some Robert Anton Wilson along the way. When did you decide that your life was going to be a magical devotion to deity in general and this specific deity? Do you consider yourself a magician as well, or do you consider yourself just a priest?
Well, I guess that depends on how you define magic. I don't define magic as being something supernatural. I think it's something completely normal, casual, even if you maintain a relationship with the power giving you your power. I guess a magician would separate a person from everyone around them, in as much as a magician practices magic where everyone else does not. I do consider myself a priest, though the powers that I work with, everyone has access to. So I guess I'm a priest.
But in Egypt, obviously Heka plays a significant role in the priestcraft, so it's not an unmagical space, right? Is that sort of what you're referring to?
Yeah,
with
kind of. Well, that was a part of everyday life to everyone. Everything. See, people think Heka means simply magic, when in reality Heka refers to essentially every single thing around you. The most magical act a person can do is simply accomplishing something on their own without relying on influence from a higher power. So anything that is innovative is Heka. So if you figure out how to bake your grandmother's pumpkin roll, that is Heka. If you figure out a way to better mix pigments for painting, that is Heka. So it's not necessarily communicating the spirit or anything. It is always being in relationship with those powers, so that certain things come a little bit more naturally to you, if that makes sense.
Sure. You're in a state of inspiration.
Yes.
So I mean, it's funny that you say that, because I've been making, as you know, and some people know, I've been making a lot of different magical craft projects, and the actual doing of it is very sort of mundane, but it still has a magical quality to me, because I feel like I'm just rediscovering things, or maybe discovering new ways of doing things that are specific to honor these various traditions, and there's definitely a magic to it, even though I'm not in a ritual space really at all, and I'm doing things sort of, crafting things with pans and bottles and so forth. But so it's nice of you to say that, because I feel that way, and it's good to hear it reverberated back from the universe. So
yeah.
Have you been a part of any magical groups or organizations along your way, or has this been a pretty much a self-taught project for you?
Well, believe it or not, for most of my life, I have been just extremely unpopular. I have not fit in anywhere. But around the time I started opening myself up to this idea of religious devotion, I started meeting different people who I can now, in hindsight, acknowledge were kind of put in my path, so to speak. Jack Grail, who I'm sure everybody knows you've had on, and then a guy named Samuel David, who is one of the most inspiring Sumerian reconstructionists, for lack of a better term. He's actually got a book coming out with Anathema, and I think he's working on a class as well. So keep an eye out for Samuel David. But the three of us live in the same city. So we kind of got together and started researching and inspiring each other to push our own boundaries, and people would come and go from our little group, which would expand from anywhere from like 3 people to up to like 30 people. I think one of we would do these rituals open to the public, and I think the biggest one we ever had was like 50 or 60 people were in attendance. So the thing about that is, I don't think that very many people realize the work that this kind of stuff requires. I don't think a lot of people are willing to like not eat while the sun is up or remain ritually pure. So I think people are, at least around here, are a little bit more drawn to the spooky element. A number of times we've been told how much our services remind them of church. So I don't know. For the most part, though, it's just been like our small group of like less than 10 people. And then once COVID happened, everything kind of shut down and we can't see any of those people anymore.
Right.
So I turned to Facebook. I brought the Church of Flesh and Feather onto Facebook, and now that's got like 600 or 700 people following it. And I think several dozen people tune in every week to the services, and every video ends up getting like 100 or so views. Jack, of course, his career is, you know, big now, and Sam's is up and coming and very exciting. So other than that, though, I've never been a part of any sort of fraternal lodge or anything like that. Yeah, it's pretty much just been me maintaining nervous breakdowns by obsessively studying and then applying it to my life in the same way that the ancients did. So here's actually an interesting point to make of that, though. I mentioned how Heka is like anything. The Egyptians left us, the ancient Egyptians left us a few medical papyri, and typically a medical spell would consist of a lengthy prayer and then something to put inside of your body, be it through drinking, eating, or even enemas were quite popular as well. But the Heka rests somewhere between the application of medicine and prayer. So people have all of these weird sort of ideas that if you take medication, that it will somehow affect the magic within you, when in reality, taking your meds is an act of Heka, is a magical act. So,
well, I think sometimes when people are on pretty serious psychological drugs, their state of consciousness is significantly affected by those drugs, and that can feel like a different, you know, taking you away from an experience. But I agree with you that if someone needs something, they should take it, and they should make it magical in what they're doing, so that they don't have troubles in their life as a result.
And like if you have like a mania of sorts, some of these medications can affect you deeper than you realize. You know, when you feel groggy all of the time and you feel uninspired, but in reality, I mean, you're staying awake, you're staying alive another day to figure out what to do with your life, and there's magic in that. So again, take your meds, folks.
That's the message that we can draw from this whole interview: is take your meds, everybody, if you need them. So let's talk a little bit about your relationship with the spirit world. You mentioned that to you, Jehuty is sort of the lens through which you approach the divine. And I know you've written about this at length, but just if you can give a quick sort of synopsis of how does that work? You know, you've got a statue that you have made divine through, you know, your practices and so forth. What is behind that? You know, where does that lead? Is Jehuty the same thing as the highest god? Is Jehuty somewhere along a chain of divine beings? How does that work in your approach to things?
Well, this is kind of getting in a little bit to the mystery school that I'm building, and I'm actually going to be teaching soon. But my idea of God is that there is a huge unknowable force. It's kind of the Gnostic idea of God. There's a huge unknowable force behind all things that we have no way of knowing. So we refer to it, we call to it by all of these names that are not that unknowable force. They are like a lesser emanation of that force, right? Yeah, I guess that being said, Jehuty is the conduit to the divine, that source. However, in the mystery tradition that I'm building, we come up with our own cosmology, as would have been traditional in Egypt. And it depicts Thoth perched in a tree, singing the entire world into existence. So even though he's not like the huge penultimate creator of all things, physically his body is the one that created all things through its voice. So it's kind of
And how does that connect with other ideas of sort of demiurge? Is he in front of the demiurge? Is he the demiurge? Where does his essence reside?
well, that's kind of getting a little bit more into the mystery tradition. The demiurge traditionally is sort of a flawed being, but to the naturist, which is kind of the movement that I've established, naturism is what I refer to it by, because I haven't lived 70 years and then died, so nobody's been around yet to give a different term for it. But to the naturist, good and bad are kind of the same thing. It's just two different sides of action. So that being said, anything deemed good could just as easily be bad, and then vice versa. So I guess it depends on what the individual's view of the demiurge is, I suppose.
When you say that that you're building a cosmology for your mystery school, are you saying that each individual person is building their own cosmology, or you are presently developing a cosmology that you are then going to share with others?
The latter. So here's the deal. I've tried for 15 years locally to be a writer, to find any sort of friends or anything like that, and just nothing has worked. And then as soon as I started embracing all of these kind of more eccentric, wackadoo ideas and practices, things started working out. And since I kind of realized there is a pattern to what I am doing that leads to success, I basically just wrote it down, and I'm hashing it all out now into a practice, into its own magical practice. So for that to work, I need there to be basically a universe in which it functions successfully, if that makes sense. So yeah, I had to start from the very beginning, and I had to create a creation myth. But if you think back to ancient Egypt, I mean, there are at least 4 different creation myths that people know about, and then there are variations of each one, and then there are non-canonical myths. So it's not that these myths necessarily explained the natural world exactly. There was a deeper ritual function to them. So I've just taken that idea and run with it a little bit. So yeah, I'm creating my own universe in which this Heka that I'm presenting to the world functions. And it's been so reliable that I'm publishing books about it now. And yeah, no, it's psychedelic.
In what ways does your cosmology resemble other ancient cosmologies or modern cosmologies?
You mean by modern cosmologies, you mean like, what do you mean by that?
Oh, well, I mean, there's various magical traditions that have sprung up in the last 100 years that have their own sort of cosmology, like Thelema and witchcraft.
I guess it's completely separate from all of those, even though it's sort of inspired by all of them as well. I read just ferociously, and I mean, I worked my way through Aleister Crowley's life. By the time I was like 13 or 14, I don't know, the Golden Dawn, the OTO, all of these things, and then I switched to the ancient stuff and got really involved with that. And yeah, I guess it just is all sort of inspired by various things I heard or read from various people, practices across the whole world. Whatever made sense and appealed to me, I kind of stuck into the big conglomeration that is naturism. So like in ancient Egypt, there is a creation myth where Thoth creates with his voice, right? Well, that makes sense to me. Again, the naturalist believes that reality is basically only what a person can convince themselves is true. And then belief is then again primarily completely self-serving. So if you can say something and believe it 100%, then it is true. So again, because I'm basically working with allegory, that translates to Thoth speaking, and his admission is creation. The word is the thing, basically.
I mean, to a large extent, that's been proven to be true.
Yeah.
in all sorts of different ways in our world just recently. Um, so your actual practice that you do on a regular basis, you mentioned that you have just fairly recently created a bunch of different prayers for every day of the year. What does your practice look like generally? Are you doing those prayers, or are you doing what you were doing previous to the prayers?
Yeah. Routine is kind of crucial, because you can't really change anything. That actually is another naturist principle. From far enough away, all things form a pattern. From very close, all things lose meaning. So somewhere in the middle there, routine is kind of crucial. So my day-to-day life, I am in shrine praying 3 times a day, presenting offerings all 3 times, larger offerings in the morning and night. Typically on weekends, I change up the schedule a little bit to accommodate the weekly broadcasts over Facebook. And then full moons and new moons get special treatment as well. And then Wednesdays usually get something a little bit adjusted because, being the day of Mercury, there are usually things I have to do on Wednesdays. So it gets both sort of tedious, but also it allows me to sort of improvise as I go. So it's like free form religion.
How much influence does your work with Jack and the other people that were involved in your group affect what you're doing?
Oh, well, probably a lot. Sam and Jack were the 2 people who sort of made me realize it was okay to have all of these really bizarre encounters and experiences, and that if I think that I'm probably doing something that is beyond most people's capabilities, if I think I'm doing it, I probably am. I'm very fortunate to have Sam, James, and especially my wife in my life, because my wife just kind of watches Sam, Jack, and I from the sidelines, bearing witness to all of this crazy stuff we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of reassurance.
Is she a grounding influence in your life?
Yeah, I mean, she certainly embraces all of this stuff, but at the same time, she would never seek it out. If anybody else told her that, we went out to the woods and we saw this dark figure of a woman approach us and turn into a dog, which is something about 10 people got to witness once, she would think they were crazy. But because she has been with us when these things have happened, she believes us. So really
let's dance off into that area for a moment. Where when you had this experience of seeing a woman who turned into a dog, what was the circumstances of that?
Oh man, well, if I recall, it was a new moon, a Adepthood. A small group of us. We live in the Midwest, so it's a pretty rural. Even the cities are pretty rural. So there's this park that we go to for Adepthood, and we usually.
I'm sorry. What is that Adepthood?
Oh well, because Jack is devoted to Hecate. That is like a feast for Hecate you leave under the new moon. So it's kind of a common practice. I think most people today probably know it. It dates back to ancient Greece, but because we all have different practices, we all kind of give our 2 cents. So Jack would, pray to Hecate. Samuel David would pray to Inanna or the Muzid, or it would change month to month. And then I would pray to Tahuti. And then we would all kind of turn and face outwards in the circle, completely in the dark, right? In the middle of the woods. holding hands, and then invite all of these powers into our circle. And then when anything would sort of appear to us, or if we felt anything, we would squeeze the person next to us's hand, so that not only do they know something is happening, but it sort of heightens their senses and makes it more likely for whatever is happening to one person to happen to another person. You know what I mean? And so in this particular instance, like I said, there were about 10 people, I think. And we called to Hecate. And as we were sort of doing a call and response thing, 5 or 6 people, I think, saw this form of this lady shoot up behind me and then change into a dog and then vanish. I didn't see it, but enough people saw it that, you know, there's some legitimacy there. And then because, again, belief is completely self-serving, some people could just dismiss it as like group hysteria or something like that. And I mean, yeah, of course you could, but if it serves a function in the moment, then believe it's real. You know what I mean?
I don't think my audience will probably think group hysteria as the the natural place to go there. They're a pretty magical group of
Be
people.
careful what you say in the American Midwest, because some of the stuff will get you kicked in the teeth. So it's sort of habitual that I sort of back away from stuff.
I think that's probably true of most of the world at this point, honestly. At least the European influenced world, that we're pretty atheistic and pretty or pretty Christian, and anything like women turning into dogs sounds a bit spooky for a lot of people. But for this particular group that's going to be watching this, most likely that's something that sounds like, hey, how do we make that happen? So you mentioned the Greek magical papyri a little earlier. Do the spells and sort of divine names and attitudes of that collection influence your work?
Well, they influence it in as much as it all sort of started from there. The Greek Magical Papyri was the first book I ever picked up with the intention of performing anything inside of it. And I think it's sort of auspicious that throughout the whole world, if anybody is holding a copy of the Greek Magical Papyri, it's been printed in Chicago, so it comes from the American Midwest. But the first time I ever picked that book up, it was like a whole other language, basically. And I had to slowly sort of make sense of it. But then as I started to get comfortable with it, especially when I started to get comfortable with the various languages contained within it, I started to find where these practices came from. So like in the PDM section of the PGM, various old.
Just to give clarification for people who haven't read the book, within that book there is a section that's in Demotic, which is Egyptian, and you know, it's a separate group of things. However, quite a few of them actually make reference to other ones in the book. So I mean, it makes sense to include them even though they're in a different language. That's when he says PDM, that's what he's referring to. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, some of that stuff is very, very old. So then you just kind of follow that rabbit hole in one direction. You know, you jump back a few steps, and then you can get into this huge Christian wormhole just from all the same block of text. So having said all of that, most of the epithets I refer to Jehuty by, I come up with myself. That's actually what the Oracle deck is. There certainly are, and there's a book by a guy named Boylan, which compiles several dozen epithets from antiquity. The book is called Thoth, the Hermes of Egypt. And while some of those I do apply to my practice, it just makes more sense that because I'm celebrating my devotion, celebrating my God through art, specifically through the written and spoken word, it just makes more sense for me to come up with my own epithets.
So let's talk about your Oracle deck, because that sounds interesting. Your Oracle deck is based on the epithets that you've come up with?
Yeah.
Do you have it around to show?
No, I haven't. I'm still working on it. It's a huge amount of work, but I've kind of realized, especially having a baby, that I don't really ever stop working. So to prevent myself from crashing hardcore, I'm sort of lining up projects. But I actually am having a heck of a time finding anybody willing to print this deck. Uh, Most people will ask about it, and I've got 2 or 3 kind of demo cards prepared.
Hmm.
And when I email them the file, they usually decline on the spot. So I don't know if if anybody has any experience publishing a
Well,
deck of tarot cards or oracle cards.
I publish a lot of cards. I can talk to you about that off air. So,
Right
um,
on.
so anyway, you're still developing. I'm actually developing a new 2 new decks myself right now. So,
Right
um,
on.
so I'm pretty excited about that. I haven't actually mentioned it to anyone other than you right now.
I
So
haven't actually mentioned mine to anyone either. So let's do this together, buddy.
all right, so decks are coming. So your Oracle deck, is it based in any way on the tarot, or is it a completely new thing, or is it based on a different sort of divination system?
Oh man, it's based on I found all of these. Okay, so here's the thing. I mentioned obsessively researching, and that
Hmm.
leads me to areas that are extremely dry, almost impenetrably so.
Hmm.
And I found this paper about ancient, I think it was Jewish star magic. And I love this system, and I'm sort of adapting it to meet my own needs a little bit. But this Oracle deck is not only going to have all of these epithets and images of Tehuti, but it's also going to sort of give you ritual instructions. So if you perform it under the night sky,
Hmm.
it'll sort of direct you to these various stars that you take note of and then continue on to the next step. So I like to pack as much functionality into stuff. Most of my life, I've lived in a truck and out of a backpack. And so if I can cram as much as I can into one object, I think
Uh,
that's pretty
well,
cool.
I mean, that sounds pretty fascinating. The going out and working with the stars sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, can you adapt that to working in a city environment in which you just utilize like an astrology program to figure out where things are, or does
Well,
it
yeah, of
need to
course.
be under the
I
night sky?
mean, yeah, of course. Being in the Midwest, for the most part, you can see the stars wherever you go.
Yeah, we can't
But
hear.
yeah, again, you can do it just as easily. Computers are like the new reality for a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
as much as they kind of freak me out, um, I think it's kind of what is necessary now is to figure out how to start practicing all of this stuff on our phones and computers because, yeah, again, more and more we're ignoring the reality around us.
Well, I
And I
mean,
am focusing more on it.
I think there's an incredible value to actually going into the natural world and experiencing the world as, because I mean, so often in a large urban area, it doesn't feel like we're very connected to nature, even though we are. But if you leave the city and go to the country and then come back to the city, you can go, oh, I see. It's all still here. It's just got all this crap on top of it.
William Blake said, what did he say? Where there is man, there is nature. So nature is in the big cities. We just have to figure out how to encounter it within the big cities.
Right.
So it would apply to these cards as well. If you can't look up at the sky and see the stars, figure out how to do it on the computer. It's still just as valid. But like I said, I am the worst at computer stuff. All of the years my peers spent figuring out computers and smartphones. I spent all of those years figuring out ancient liturgical languages and like cryptids and things like that. So I
I mean,
missed all of it.
that
But
sounds like a fun life too. So don't.
but,
So um, the the litanies that you've created and the epithets that you've created, do you consider those to be magically received from Jehuty, or are those things that you've created in order to get closer to Jehuty?
well, the Book of Flesh and Feather, I would say, definitely Tahuti kind of had a hand in the writing of that. As far as the prayers go, I would say that I was definitely inspired, um, almost ritually. So, but I mean, part of my life being a priest is turning my whole entire day-to-day life into more or less one long continuous ritual. wherein I devote myself to Jehuty every morning and live my day in service of him. So even if I could say that no, it all came straight from my mind, I mean, still to a large extent it was divinely inspired. So
I appreciate that. I think that it's funny when an occult author says that they weren't divinely inspired to me, because it's like,
any kind of practice throughout all of time that didn't rely on the devotion of a deity of some kind. And I don't know, people like to abandon their gods now, but it's just not how it has ever worked, really. So, but again, I do understand people feeling uncomfortable with the idea of devotion. That's part of the reason why I started this church. I'm a very strange person, and I think most of the people that have been on board from the very get-go in helping me build this are kind of eccentric as well.
Mhm.
So we kind of are working to build a comfortable environment to ease people into devotion. You can certainly be religiously devoted while still maintaining a sense of wonder, mystery, and then of course having fun doing it. I love pushing myself, seeing what crazy stuff I can encounter. Basically, one time I made it rain for several seconds, and again, old Samuel, David, my wife were there, and when the rain started coming as commanded, basically, and I turned around and I saw their faces and realized it was raining, and I sort of stopped believing in that second, and it all stopped. So again, I don't know, it's kind of just, it's a thrill. What kind of crazy stuff can you convince yourself is real? Yeah, I don't know.
So let's talk a little bit about your inner world for a moment. One of the things I like to explore with people is how much visionary experience they're having on a regular basis. So do you do sort of scrying and work that would involve directly encountering spirit in various ways?
Every single day. I actually, before any belief in God or anything, there was just simply the belief in ghosts. When my father kind of came back into my life, he was very established in the paranormal community. So to try to get to know him a little bit, I would tag along to all of that stuff. And for the most part, I never experienced anything, or rather, I never experienced anything I couldn't explain away until, of course, I experienced something I couldn't explain anymore. And so then that kind of opened the gate for all of this. What I've found is that, again, the supernatural world does not exist. Anything that can happen is supposed to happen by natural law, right? And also, that being said, there is no such thing as law. Everything is arbitrary and meaningless. But these ghosts, wandering spirits, the Aku, right, that we experience day to day, are much more prevalent than most people realize. In fact, it's almost to the point of being just casual. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but up on my ancestor altar, there's a skull that I refer to as my singing skull, and that works as sort of a mercy seat because everything is alive and we're surrounded by other spirits. If you give them a place to rest, there are ways of making them talk once they're resting. So I don't know, I forgot what the question was, but day to day.
I think that you answered it recently. My question was specific to sort of inner experience. You're referring to ghosts and the vision of the lady who turned into a dog. Those are more outer experiences, although they could be argued to be inner experiences on a level too. But when you're doing your daily work, are you going into an altered state and encountering deity, or are you? Yeah, and so what does that entail, and what does that look like?
Well, I do a lot of ink scrying. Actually, I do a lot of scrying with ink you made, which is pretty cool. And now, for our convenience, safe to consume.
Some of them are.
Then also dreams are really big too as well. dream divination is kind of a passion of mine. And actually,
Mine too.
if you get on Spotify or in countries that don't have Spotify, Anchor, and type in the Sleep Temple of Tehuti, that's Tehuti, you can actually hear a number of attempts. They're vowel intonation meditations. I think people familiar with the Greek magical papyri are probably familiar with the long, seemingly just kind of gibberish strings of vowels. And it's even more so in Coptic texts. Those strings of vowels they're practically pages and pages long.
Sure. Yeah.
We actually know from firsthand accounts a little bit what those were used for. Like Greco-Roman visitors to Egypt, like Demetrius, described those vowels as being sung to sort of induce trance almost. So I just kind of took that idea and ran with it a little bit. And so, yeah, I found intoning these vowels melodically sort of puts you into a certain altered state of mind. And again, if you're one of those people that demands science explain things a little bit more than just a belief, there is science to back up a lot of this stuff, like how you're capable of syncing. Certain beats are capable of syncing with your circadian rhythm and affecting your whole body. It's all this stuff. It's beyond me a little bit, but yeah, trance work, getting into a certain altered state and then experiencing Tehuti firsthand, or any spirits. It's a part of pretty much my everyday life, and it's also kind of loud. So I always make the joke, I can't imagine what my neighbors probably think I'm doing. I can hear them
singing vowels
upstairs. They can hear me chanting. I guess it's an even trade.
So you're chanting and you're experiencing Jehuty. Are you having a dialogue back and forth with Jehuty, or is it more of an immersion in Jehuty?
I mean, kind of sometimes both. It's kind of how I reach divine inspiration. I kind of encounter him, and sometimes there are very vivid visuals in my mind. Sometimes it's just faint whispers. It just kind of varies from experience to experience. I don't know if you're familiar with Austin Osman Spare, but he's kind of one of my favorite automatic writers and drawers. And he was the first occultist I ever encountered, I guess. And I found my way to him through Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. But I love Austin Osman Spare. And so I experiment a lot with automatic drawing and writing. So sometimes I kind of come to and I fill the whole page with gibberish, and I'll spend the next 3 or 4 days trying to sort of pull out what I actually subconsciously put on the page. It's a lot of fun.
So practical occultism, you've mentioned a few sightings and a miraculous moment with rain. Are there other ways in which you use magic to influence the world around you?
Well, again, because it's kind of a part of my everyday life, I would say that just about everything I do is endowed with some sort of magic. It's kind of funny. I'm almost always performing some sort of magical experiment. And so kind of day to day, what that might look like is me using words or pronouncing words incorrectly, intentionally, to sort of take note of what happens. Actually, dig this. This pin I'm flailing around is it's made out of a corn cob from the American Midwest, and then grave dirt from the prophet Nicholas Vachel Lindsay, and then lapis lazuli to represent the Sangamon River, and then, of course, Jehuty, and then soil from the Sangamon Riverbank. So I don't know, it's just kind of wherever I can shove it, I do, or rather, wherever I find it, I acknowledge it.
And did you make that pen?
I did not, actually. A guy made it for me. He's not making them anymore, so I can't really plug his business. Now he's making dabbing tools, which, I mean, there's still a market for that. I don't know if I can talk about drug use on this show or not, but
Sure, yeah, absolutely. This isn't made for kids, so.
marijuana is certainly a part of my ritual experience a lot of the times, and that actually dates all the way back to ancient Egypt. They referred to specifically medical cannabis as shumshamut, and there are several recipes existing from antiquity that dictate that you shove it up your butt. So,
Is that the usual way that it was taken, or would they eat it or smoke it as well?
kind of the it wasn't really ever smoked. It was kind of sprinkled into incense sometimes,
Hmm.
which I guess is kind of close. But no, for the most part, it was shoved up the old butt, which that I mean was a pretty common practice at the time. So
So if you're sitting on some bud and you don't know what to do with it, you might slip it up there.
we'll see what's kind of cool with everything being legalized now is that you can actually go to dispensaries and buy suppositories now, THC suppositories. I've never tried that, but I'm certainly open to it. But
It seems like when you ingest cannabis, it affects you somewhat differently than when you smoke it. It seems like it affects your body more. So I wonder if there would even be a third way that it would affect you if you used it as a suppository, because it gets into your system in a different way.
let's you and I do our own experiments and meet back here in a few months and compare experiences.
Okay, sounds good. So, um, let's talk about the Church of Flesh and Feather. So right now, this is mostly an online thing, right? Because everyone's sort of still staying at home. Do you have a plan to have it be in a place eventually?
Yeah, there is a certainly a power, palpable feeling of power that one can get from worshiping in a group. And
Hmm.
that is something that most people in this community will never know, which is a shame. And I would like to provide that to this community. So while there are conventions here and there, I would ultimately like to have a brick and mortar temple space. And I'm sure there would be, well, as it stands now, we're a fully functional temple. So it would basically just be expanding a little bit, and we'd have our own library and reading room. We'd have our own sleep temple space, shrines to whatever deities people bring to the temple. But that's kind of far off in the future, and the future doesn't exist. So I don't know. Right now,
Right. It'll manifest when it manifests. Yes.
yeah, or it won't. We'll see.
So you mentioned the sleep temple, and that brings me back to something I wanted to ask you about. When you're doing a dream divination, are you hoping to have a lucid experience during your sleep cycle, or are you just interpreting what comes naturally? How does your dream incubation process work?
Well, here's the thing. Everybody always dreams, whether you remember it or not.
Hmm.
Uh, Lucid dreaming is actually a little bit more common than most people realize, but none of that really matters so long as you can remember your dream. You'd be surprised how many methods there are for pulling meaning out of those dreams. And I actually cover it in my Blackthorn School class.
Okay, we haven't mentioned that, and that is called Speak Thoth: Ancient Egyptian Magic in the Modern World, and that's available on. Is it enrolling now, or is it currently running?
It's currently running, but you can enroll late.
Okay.
Everything is available to you. It's a 13-week course, and I think we're like 4 weeks in. So you've got a few weeks still before you can sign up to start from the very beginning. But so far, it's pretty cool. We're actually on the Sleep Temple, the Dream Divination section right now, and it's blowing people's minds. So,
I
what was
just
a
I
quick
just
thing?
I just taught a class on dream divination, or a similar form to that just recently. Um, it's an amazing area that I don't think people really work with all that much. It's almost half our life spent in that space, and we spend so little energy in the magical community on the subject of it at
People
all.
don't realize how much actually still. I mean, we only have two dream books from ancient Egypt that we have found so far. But despite that, I mean, we know sort of a lot about these temples, whether it be from firsthand accounts from what we have found left over from these temples, or simply just because the two dream books that we have were written like 2,000 years apart. So that sort of suggests that these were an extremely common practice in the day, you know. So it's, I don't know, it's a very fruitful area that I think more people, I'm hoping more people pay attention to a little bit more. It's really psychedelic. A lot of the ways to pull out meaning from these dreams is just simply word games, basically. Puns are certainly very common, but here's a word that I had to practice over and over again for this class. Homoeoteleuton, which basically means different words that have similar endings. They don't necessarily rhyme, but I don't know, there's just a million different ways of pulling significance out of your dreams. It makes me wonder why people, even people who don't believe in any of this, could probably benefit from practicing it a little.
Sure. Well, I mean, certainly it's a strange thing that we don't put in our society, let alone in the magical community. We don't put, I mean, it's just considered to be nothing unless you're involved in Jungian therapy. Like dreams are just completely ignored. And in fact, there's a common trope, and I kind of agree, that listening to other people's dreams is exhausting, you know, because they're meaningful only to the person who dreamed them and not to anybody else. So so it can get tiring to have someone who really likes to tell you about their dreams all the time. But I mean, that being said, that person who's talking about their dreams very often still doesn't apply any meaning to it whatsoever for their life. They just remember them and talk about them. So it's great that
thing to do, to talk about something that you just you admit isn't significant to you in any way. I mean, it seems like a waste of your life to do things like that.
Sure. So the vowel chanting recordings that you can find on Spotify, are those just you? Are you singing them, or are you just reciting them? What is the experience that a person has if they find those?
Yeah, I'm singing them. It's for the most part, it's all improvised. There's usually a prayer, and then I have this tongue drum that I play as well, and that's simply because it's quieter than like this actual drum. I usually do these at like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And like I said, I know my neighbors can hear me doing this stuff, but if I was substantially louder, I'm sure that they would raise a fuss about it. So
Sure. How many of them have you recorded?
Oh man, how many have I recorded, or how many have I released? Because
how many have you released?
Huge difference. I don't know, about a dozen. But actually, once the world opens back up, I'm hoping to do them live as sort of like a guided meditation kind of thing.
Yeah.
Actually, for the for the OTO, I did one as sort of like a guided meditation. I can't actually, off the top of my head, this happened like 2 months ago, so I should be able to remember, but I don't. What the purpose was, but I guided them to, I think, receive a true dream. I don't know. It was cool. It was a psychedelic experience. And again, if I can get a whole bunch of groovy people out at a park or something doing this, I don't know. I think it'd be fun. So.
And so it's called the Sleep Temple of Tehuti. That's how you find that on Spotify?
Or Anchor, yeah.
Or Anchor.
I think Asian countries do not have Spotify, so they'd have to go to Anchor. I think that's how that works. But yeah, regardless, yeah.
Well, I want to, first of all, is there anything else that you want to promote or talk about before I let you go?
Let's see.
We've got 2 books, your Spotify, you've got a Patreon that people can support, right?
Yeah. This gets very expensive, and I'm not trying to put on a show or anything. I am not a wealthy person. I work, nights at a job that I despise. But if you want to help contribute to the Church of Flesh and Feathers Patreon, we do 2 things with that. One, it goes to just maintaining the shrine, which again, leaving offerings 3 times a day is very expensive, but we also donate it because we think that there is a certain power in putting the name Thoth on a check and then mailing it off to something meaningful. This month we mailed a check to the Last Prisoner Project, which is actually sort of in keeping with our discussion regarding Shumshumut. Yeah, so there's that Patreon. I feel kind of guilty having it, but at the same time, like, people want to help, and I don't know, it's kind of cool. Kind of gets people in the habit of helping where they can.
Yeah, I mean, I think running a brick and mortar church is a lot about asking for donations. So get used to it.
I don't think I'll ever apply for tax exemption, because I go back and forth regarding that, and basically, I don't know. I don't think it's fair. I don't know. Whatever. That's, I guess.
Well, I don't think your other church running people are going to agree with you. So you I guess you can make your choice.
We're not your grandma's church.
So if you could impart one piece of advice or wisdom to a person who is just coming to a devotional practice or a magical practice, what would that be?
Oh man, I actually have an answer to this. Are you familiar with Zen koans? I think that's how you pronounce it. I've never heard it spoken. I've actually kind of got one for just this situation. A young boy comes across an old priest in a field writing strange symbols on a piece of papyrus and asks, "What are you doing?" And the old priest says, "This is Heka." And the little boy looks down and says, "What is Heka?" And the old man says, "Heka is a lion's rear end." And I'll leave you with that. You have to think about it and figure it out. And if you do, get a hold of me, and I don't know, it'll be fun, I guess. I don't know.